Morning, everyone. This is an exchange between Jason Kenney and a reporter, a Calgary-based reporter. He says, I can't believe this is a Calgary-based reporter. Well, and here it is. It's about the Green New Deal, and Kenney calls it out for what we all think it is. Here we go.
The oil and gas market taking such a hit, when do you start thinking about a full-on transition away from traditional fossil fuels? And when you're talking to American representatives, for example, are you talking to anybody who advocates for a Green New Deal?
As Minister Nixon has said, Alberta has our Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Program, which invests in technology to reduce the environmental impact and carbon intensity of our energy production. When you talk about the Green New Deal, listen, our focus is on getting people back to work in Alberta, not pie-in-the-sky ideological schemes. We are actually not trying to amplify, but to fight back against the political agenda of the Green left that has been trying to landlock Alberta energy. So we're not going to cooperate with the folks that are trying to shut down Canada's single largest subsector. You're talking here, I mean, that kind of question in the middle of an economic crisis from a Calgary-based media outlet really, frankly, throws me for a loop. Sounds like you're reporting for the Tyee or something. Here's the reality. Canada's oil and gas sector employs directly and indirectly 500,000 Canadians, has paid $380 billion to governments over the past 18 years, is by far our largest export industry, and Canada has the third largest proven and probable oil reserves on Earth. We are the fourth largest producer and one of the largest natural gas producers. Even in the most bearish scenario for oil consumption produced by the International Energy Agency, they see at least 70 million barrels per day of oil consumption in 2040, 2 decades from now. That would be down by only 30% from the average over the past few years. And in that world, 20 years from now, when the world needs that energy, we want to make sure that it's coming from a stable...
So obviously they cut it off there, but he goes off, right? He's like, we're not propagating or helping these lefty ideologues push their crazy Green New Deal. And he makes a lot of really good points. In 20 years, even if there's a reduction, and maybe there will be, maybe COVID-19 changed everything, and maybe there will be a big reduction. But even in the most bearish predictions, a reduction of 30%, we would still have oil to participate in said game, right? We would be able to export under those conditions. We'd be able to maybe satisfy our own needs under those conditions. Maybe we'd be able to provide Eastern Canada with Canadian oil instead of buying Saudi oil, right? I mean, you know, I know Irving likes its Saudi oil. I know that Saudi oil tankers are allowed to dock in Eastern Canada, but don't you dare dock an oil tanker in Western Canada, right? That's terrible. Not allowed to do that, says BC. But isn't it interesting, right? Like, we could just be self-sufficient. We could have no export wishes, no use for exporting oil at all, and just become self-sufficient. And that would be an improvement, and that would also stimulate Alberta oil. But I think that it was funny, the whole exchange. And I think Kenney was just kind of getting going, so I didn't want to interrupt him. There was a lot of zingers there, and then the clip kind of peters out. So I apologize for that. I should have stopped it sooner. Anyway, moving on. CBC is reporting COVID-19 recovery plan for New Brunswick begins with 2 household bubbles, but mass gatherings may wait a year. Okay. One of the important aspects of a plan when you're putting public policy together is public buy-in. People have to think the plan's good and say, yeah, that's a good plan. We're going to do that. This is a dumb plan. Think about split families and think about, say mom has the kids and dad has the kids on weekends or something to that effect, right? And dad hasn't seen the kids for a couple of weeks. So the presumption here, maybe, possibly, is that would be the family bubble and you get to see your kids and stuff. I don't know if that's been happening during this whole crisis. Have people just stayed in place or have visits been happening? I'm not sure, right? And I used to work in children's mental health, and I'm wondering, and I don't know if you know, please do let us know. Keep everything confidential as you would. But do visits happen? Were group homes completely shut down because of this whole thing, or are they group homes continuing and people going to visit their families? Anyway, this is a can of worms that I didn't intend to open, but my brain goes there. Anyway, regardless of the family situation, regardless of all of that, regardless of the legality of visits and all of that, the idea is you choose one household and then you can't change your household. So what if you have a falling out with those friends? Or what if things change, right? How long do you have to not change your household? This is just a dumb plan, in my opinion, and I'm going to read it for you now. Here we go. I'll stop editorializing now. Here we go. New Brunswick's 4-phase COVID-19 recovery plan begins immediately with the loosening of physical distancing restrictions to allow 2 household gatherings, Premier Blaine Higgs announced Friday. People can choose one other household to partner with to form a 2-family bubble. Their choice must be mutual, and once they decide, they cannot choose a different household, Higgs told reporters during the day at the daily briefing in Fredericton. Co-workers and neighbors can resume carpooling if the passenger travels in the back seat. I want to pause here. There's no period there at the end of the sentence. That's weird. Anyway, regardless of that, if I were vaping in the back seat of the carpooled car, you would, probably smell that, right? And I think that if you were shedding virus, and if it's as contagious as they say it is, you would potentially be exposed, right? So is this a well thought out deal? I don't think any of these plans are well thought out. I think there's giant holes in them you could fly a jet plane through. I think that if these are the plans, if this is the best of the best, if this is what we've got, well, I mean, let's start over. Holy cow. These are not good plans. I don't think they're going to get public buy-in. I think that once you loosen restrictions to a certain point, it looks just like regular life and people will just behave that way. I think that targeted interventions with specific goals in mind so people can keep it simple, but this is just insane. This is just insane. It's so convoluted, it doesn't make any sense. Back to this, okay. Their choice must be mutual, and once they decide they cannot choose a different household, Higgs told reporters, coworkers and neighbors can resume. No, it doesn't make sense. Okay. Within 2 to 4 weeks, provided there is no significant new wave of the virus, up to 10 people will be allowed to gather as long as they maintain physical distance of at least 6 feet or 2 meters. So with this aspect, with 2 families getting together, that's potentially more than 10 people, right? If there's 5 or 6 kids, and there are people who have that many children still. And so how do you police that? Do you police it with fines and bylaw officers? That hasn't gone so well, not so publicly popular, right? Let's bring the chain gangs and the shame Twitter mobs, right? I don't think so. That's not going to work. So how do you reliably do this? And then they go on to the next one. If all goes well, progressively people will be able to extend their bubbles to include more family and friends, and gatherings of up to 50 people will be allowed. Okay, how do you can't change, but you can extend your bubble. So at what point is this back to regular life? Again, you need targeted interventions with specific goals. Keep it simple. Wear a mask when out in public to protect other people. Wash your hands when you get home. These seem not to be all that complicated, right? Mass gatherings are still to be determined. No Canada Day fireworks, right? I guess when still, I think that would be more safe because you'd be outside rather than going to a restaurant, right? I think that there's things that don't make sense, in my opinion. Back to this. There won't be any concerts or festivals for at least the rest of the year, Higgs said, and bars and organized sports may not be able to start up again until a vaccine is available, which could take 12 to 18 months. It wasn't a decision the government took lightly, he said. Okay. The vaccine, I think, is pie in the sky. I don't see how we're going to get a turnaround on a vaccine that is both safe and effective in 18 months. We don't have one for the cold. They redevelop one for the flu every year because it changes. Everything I've read about this says it mutates. So I don't understand this. I don't understand putting all our eggs in one basket. So says this one. Trudeau says that it doesn't hinge on a vaccine. So we'll see. And I've got the article for that too, and we're going to move on. But I just think that the idea that bars and restaurants may have to wait 12 to 18 months, most bars and restaurants aren't going to last 12 to 18 months. Most owners will go back to whatever they were doing before they owned the bar and the restaurant. A bar and a restaurant is not, it operates on 2 to 5% margins, 5% being really good. You can't just close that down for a year and then come on back, guys. Don't worry, we're not going to close the economy again for an extended period, maybe, probably, just in case. There's no reliability. And I mean, once the economy does reopen, how many people are going to be going out regularly for food? I mean, there's going to be a group of people, 20-year-olds or 18 to 29-year-olds, but I think that there's not necessarily been a shift, but I don't go out for dinner very often anyway, and I'm not encouraged at this point to go back out for dinner, right? Like, we order in every now and then, but very rare these days, very rare. So, and not since the beginning of this. Anyway, moving on, here's CBC reporting Canada's top doctor warns against relying on herd immunity to reopen the economy. Now, Quebec is trying to rely on herd immunity. I'm going to show you that. Canada's top doctor says there isn't enough evidence to back herd immunity as a way to reopen society, as Quebec's premier is considering the approach to restart his province's economy. The idea of ... generating natural immunity is actually not something that should be undertaken, Canada's Chief Public Health Officer Theresa Tam said Saturday, urging people to be extremely cautious about the concept. Theresa Tam, just to make sure that you know, is the one who said that borders don't work. How's the border of your house? Is it good? Yeah, it's apparently those ones work, but Canada's borders, they don't work to keep the virus out, despite Taiwan's success and some other successes too, but specifically Taiwan's. And she's also the one that said masks didn't work up until last week. There have been lots of successes, North Korea and Singapore to name two, that have used masks in their public policy to great success. And I believe South Korea has their economy open as well as Taiwan. So again, this woman has been wrong consistently. As wrong as me saying North Korea when I meant South Korea. But there's lots of North Korea news. I'm not going to get into it, but Kim Jong-un, not so good. Anyway, well, because Trump had kind of negotiated a ceasing of state terrorist, rogue state activities through Kim Jong-un. So his departure from that top spot is not so good. Anyway, so it's interesting that Theresa Tam is now saying that we can't possibly do this. Don't even try it. It's notable, right? She's been wrong about everything else. I mean, maybe we should try it first. We'll see. Back to this. The World Health Organization, WHO, published a brief Friday stating there is currently no evidence that people who have recovered from COVID-19 and have antibodies would be protected from a second infection, but clarified Saturday that most people infected would end up with some level of protection. Okay, so the first brief on Friday said, no, if you get this, you could definitely get this again. And my immediate question was, well, how the heck does a vaccine work then? If there's no herd immunity and there's no immunity given from getting it, how exactly would you protect? How exactly would you generate something that would protect you artificially if there's no natural way to protect yourself? Aren't vaccines derived from the natural protection humans create, antibodies, right? Like, that's what I think, but maybe I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments if I'm wrong, I'll highlight it. Here's the WHO saying, earlier today we tweeted about a new WHO scientific brief on immunity passports. The thread caused some concern, and we would like to clarify. We expect that most people who are infected with COVID-19 will develop an antibody response that will provide some level of protection. Sounds ominous, doesn't it? Tam's comments come as Quebec Premier François Legault expressed interest in the herd immunity this week as a means to reopening businesses and allowing children to return to school. The idea is to gradually, and that's the important word, to gradually let people out, let children go out, he said Thursday, adding that those under 60 years of age might be candidates for developing immunity. Tam rejected the suggestion that in the absence of a vaccine, some members of Canada's population could offer protection to society's most vulnerable. Even a young person might get severely sick or get into the ICU, so it's not a concept that should be supported, she said. Okay, so this was on the 25th. Today's the 26th that this was sent out. Here's a report on the 15th. That it was published, This is from Montreal, CBC reporting, as Quebec considers reopening schools, this is what experts say about herd immunity, okay? So Theresa Tam is saying that children might get this and end up in the ICU, so it's not a good idea. We shouldn't consider this. Here's what Caroline Quach, and I think that's how you say that. There's a picture of Caroline, right? Why wait until September? Hi, Caroline. She's a microbiologist and infectious disease specialist at CHU St. Justine, and as far as achieving herd immunity goes, it makes little difference whether schools reopen now or in September. So why not send the kids back now, says Dr. Caroline. While many parents are afraid of the risks that schools reopening could mean for their children, Dr. Caroline Quach, a pediatrician a pediatric microbiologist at St. Justine Hospital, said it is extremely rare for children to die or develop complications from COVID-19. Okay, so the chief health officer says, nope, too risky, right? Even a young person might get severely sick or into the ICU. And somebody that the CBC is relying on, an expert, is saying, nope, it's not a big deal, right? It's extremely rare for children to die or develop complications. So, I mean, what is it? It's hard to know. It's hard to know the truth because our media seems to be selling whatever it wants to on whatever day it wants to. It just says, oh, here it is. Here's the daily narrative. Just eat it up. Okay, anyway. There's a calculated risk you have to look at, Quach said. We have to, at one point in time, stop confinement and start to live again. Is she talking to parents there or what? In Quach's view, in terms of achieving herd immunity, there's not much difference between sending children back to school now or in September. In September, even if we're at 10 or 15%, we're still far off from the 60% mark that we think is needed to stop transmissions, she said. Quach noted that in Sweden, where the government's public health directives are not strict and elementary schools remain open, the mortality rate is significantly below that of worst-hit European countries, such as Italy and the UK. Quach said allowing people to resume some activities gradually with the goal of achieving herd immunity entails separating seniors from young people and keeping a close eye on community transmission. So if you're starting to lose control over the transmission, you have to close down again in certain areas of activities. Quach said the decision to reopen schools should depend on the virus data for each specific region. If you're in an area where things seem to be settling down, there's a point where slowly you'll be able to reopen various sectors without getting that curve to go completely wild. That's why you need very specific data. Okay, so it seems to me that we don't test nearly enough to have anything close to the amount of data that they're talking about. And in order to get that data, if you could be infected really quickly, it just seems like you'd have to be constantly testing. It doesn't make any sense. Like it's really, I don't know that it's realistic to be talking about the testing at the levels that they're talking about and to expect things to open up like as normal. It's really kind of strange. Here it is. Legault is not, I'm back to the article. Legault is not alone in searching. So it's strange in that, quickly here, what they're saying doesn't match up with what seems to be true about the virus, right? Like if you do this and then, if the curve doesn't go wild, then we can keep things open. Like from what I've been told, if there's 1 or 2 infections, the curve's going to go wild. There's no in between, right? That's why we had to shut down in the first place. So it just seems really weird that they're at odds with each other, what they're saying and what's actually true, right? Whatever. Anyway, back to this. Legault is not alone in searching for solutions to reopen his province's economy as nationwide shutdown passed the 1-month mark. On Friday afternoon, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Canada's premiers agreed to work on a joint set of national guidelines that would lay out how to carry out the process. The Prime Minister said Sunday that those plans do not rely on using immunity as an interim form of protection. In the approach that we're taking very carefully around the provinces and across the country on looking at reopening, I don't believe that there are any plans that hinge on certain people or individuals being immune or having immunity to COVID-19, Trudeau said. Okay, so that's weird, right? Because you would expect if herd immunity doesn't exist and we can't rely on that as something to rely on, then you would expect we would need to wait for a vaccine, but that's apparently not what Justin Trudeau is saying there. Here's another one, and I'm highlighting this one because it's not about what the headline says. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau taking cautious approach to economic recovery plans. The only part that's about economic recovery is in yellow. The beginning is talking about the number of dead on Saturday, and it says, despite the ongoing coronavirus carnage, provinces are moving ahead with plans to cautiously begin reopening the lockdown. I mean, talk about priming the audience, right? It says, however, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who talked to the premiers on Friday about the recovery strategies, stressed yesterday that none of them were hinge on people being immune to catching COVID-19. He said it's too soon to talk about immunity passports, thank goodness, for Canadians who've been infected with COVID-19 because the science is still unclear about whether those who have recovered from the virus are protected from catching it again. And again, if that's true, how in the world are we developing a vaccine that's going to be ready in 12 to 18 months? I smell BS. And I'm going to move on because I've already gone long. Here is a Global News article from the 25th. It says Canada is releasing immigration detainees at unprecedented rates among COVID-19 fears. The number of immigration detainees held in provincial jails and immigration holding centers across Canada has dropped by more than half since COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic, according to data provided by Global News. and recent decisions from Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada, IRB, the administrative tribunal that presides over immigration and refugee matters, show how fears over COVID-19 are playing a significant role in some rulings to release immigration detainees. On March 17th, there were 353 immigration detainees held in provincial jails and immigration holding centers across Canada, according to data from the Canada Border Service Agency, CBSA. By April 19th, that number dropped by more than half to 147 detainees, 117 of whom were being held in provincial jails. The remaining 30 were held in one of Canada's 3 immigration holding centers in Toronto, Laval, Quebec, and Surrey, BC. We would never normally see such a dramatic drop in detention in such a short period of time. That's unprecedented, said Swathi Sakar, an immigration and refugee lawyer based in Toronto. A number of legal and advocacy groups have been calling for the release of immigration detainees and people held in jails and prisons who are not deemed risks to public safety due to the rising number of COVID-19 cases in these facilities and the conditions there that make it difficult to isolate and control the spread of infection. Weird. Moving forward, I'm just going to remind you, this is from April 4th. Ontario releases more than 1,900 inmates, many with nowhere to go. This is provincial, not federal. And so this is John. Hold on. And he says, after being released early, they need to offer more to the inmates here because they kick you out on the street. You have nowhere to go. They expect you to follow the rules and whatnot, but they make it hard, he explains. And here's homeless shelter. COVID-19 outbreak spikes among homeless in Toronto with 135 cases. A COVID-19 outbreak has surged among Toronto's homeless in the last 10 days with at least 135 cases, the majority of which come from one shelter that houses refugees. 10 days ago, there were 30 cases of COVID-19 among the city's homeless, but now there are 88 residents at the Willowdale Welcome Centre alone who have tested positive for the disease, according to recent released data from Toronto Public Health. Officials say the majority of the cases at the shelter are asymptomatic or have mild symptoms of the disease. Isn't that interesting? So there's a big outbreak and most people have just no symptoms or mild symptoms. Okay, back to this. Naheem Albana, who came to Canada from Jordan via Iraq, lives at the shelter and found out 2 days ago that she tested positive for the disease. I have no symptoms. I'm okay, she said. She told the Canadian Press from her room at the shelter. I'm not scared and I'm not worried. However, McDonald Scott, her immigration lawyer, is worried. She's a remarkably positive person, but I'm scared for her, he said. We've been calling for a change at the shelter because it's too crowded and social distancing is impossible. You know who doesn't have a lobby or a lawyer? Old people. Elderly people who've paid taxes to Canada, etc. They don't have anybody who's collectively calling for them to be cared for, right? I mean, maybe Doug Ford. Back to this. There are more than 200 residents at the shelter, all of whom who were tested for the disease by healthcare workers from the North York General Hospital over the weekend, along with all the shelter staff, according to Homes First, which runs the facility. Is this general practice for the old age homes too? Are all the staff and all the residents tested, or is it just the ill people? I'm not sure. I'll have to look at that. Back to this. We've made changes at the Willowdale Welcome Centre, including moving those who are at a higher risk to a hotel program and isolating those who have tested negative in a separate area of the building. The plan is to keep the remainder who have COVID-19 but without symptoms at the shelter. They're not allowed to leave for 14 days. Are other people allowed to go to the shelter? Because if you're exposed to somebody who's got COVID-19, then I feel like I shouldn't have to explain that. Okay, back to this. Quote, I cannot go outside, so I'm working on my English and I'm memorizing the Quran, she said. Yep. Here's another one from CTV. I know I've gone long. April 25th, BC will relocate hundreds of homeless people to vacant hotel rooms. The province of British Columbia is planning to relocate over 1,000 people who are homeless into vacant hotel rooms. The government said it has worked with municipalities since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic to secure 1,700 hotel and community center spaces. In a joint statement made Saturday from the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction and the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, the government announced space for 686 people in Vancouver and 324 people in Victoria. That doesn't add up to 1,000, by the way. I just making sure. Yes, it does. Sorry, I was doing quick math and I didn't realize it was an 8. Never mind. The space are meant for people living in large tent cities, including Oppenheimer Park in Vancouver, as well as Topaz Park and Pandora Avenue in Victoria. I think that it's funny that we're not willing to address the causes of the tent city, but we're willing to move them into hotels. Like, we'll vacuum this up, but we're not willing to solve the problem, the reason housing is so expensive, the money laundering, all of that stuff, the stuff that I was talking about before this whole crisis hit. It's crazy. Back to this. He said encampments present an elevated risk where it's impossible to follow the recommendations of the provincial health officer to prevent the spread of COVID-19. It's impossible to follow the recommendations in a condominium, right? Like if you're sharing heat exchange with people, then you're going to be exposed potentially. Back to this. The province said each person will have their own living space and access to meals, laundry, washrooms, storage, and healthcare. Advocates have been calling on the government to help homeless populations self-isolate during the pandemic. Vancouver City Councillor Jean Swanson was set to introduce a motion to encourage a similar move next week. The provincial health officer says we should isolate and stay home, but you can't stay home if you don't have a home, Swanson told CTV News Monday. There are 8 hotels in Vancouver that will be opening their doors to the homeless. Victoria will use 5 hotels with the dozens of other hotel spaces scattered all across the province. BC Housing will start moving people into the temporary accommodations starting Saturday. The province will be using its powers under the declared state of emergency to relocate everyone out of encampments by May 9th. The hotels aren't being named, but the province has said the space will be rented with a lease agreement. And the last piece is Spencer Fernando, and he says, why is the federal government releasing criminals from prison while seniors are dying locked away in care homes? Why are innocent seniors locked away in personal care homes while the virus is spreading out of control, while prisoners, including dangerous and violent offenders, are released from jail for their own safety? Think about that sentence above for a moment. It's truly upside down what's happening. Care homes are being ravaged by the coronavirus, with people losing their grandparents and parents at a horrendous rate. Meanwhile, people who have committed violent crimes, including assaults, shootings, robberies, and more, are being let out of jail, supposedly for their own protection, as the virus spreads in prisons. It's very strange. It's a very strange journey to go on to realize where the priorities of this government lie, and that they're moving heaven and earth to protect certain sectors of the population, but largely locking up another sector and not the sector you'd think. I mean, it's very interesting. This has been already too long, so thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for sticking with me. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. Check out CanadaReport.co. And you can download me anywhere you find your podcasts. Just search Canada Poly, and I'll be getting Speaking Moistly on podcasts as well. And have a wonderful